Welcome back, Hnrs. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the rise and eventual fall of Napoleon Bonaparte, right? Even though this flip is going to be nice and short, I'm feeling, about like 13 minutes, right? But the thing that we need to understand, though, is that I am very proud of y'all, right? I'm very proud of y'all for continuing to work hard and still hustling and doing what you need to get done to make sure that we close this third quarter out before we start our fourth quarter and head our way into summer, right? Which is a really, really exciting time. Y'all are still working, though, and you're still getting your stuff done, and you're still staying on top of it, as evident from your quiz yesterday, right? And I got to give some special shout-outs to all of y'all for just participating in class, being great. Happy birthday, Nicole. Thank you, Lena, for helping me remember that the Ides of March is this weekend and that I need to bring y'all donuts to your morning review next week. So thank y'all so much. You're doing a great job. But let's pick up where we left off in class, talking about this ultimately failed invasion of Egypt that Napoleon is going to decide to go on, all right? The invasion of Egypt, yes, was a failure, right? This invasion of Egypt that was geographically a good idea on paper, right? It was going to be ultimately a failure when he could not actually beat this man right here, Admiral Horatio Nelson, in battle, right? Which was going to be pretty embarrassing, right? So, and also because, the guy is the leader of the British Navy, and then also because you were trying to insult the British with this victory, and on top of it, he also is blind in one eye, he's missing one arm, and he still bested you on those waters regardless, right? One of the only major things that actually came out of the invasion of Egypt was actually Napoleon's armies found this thing, which actually might be extra credit on your test, all right? They found this thing, which is actually called the Rosetta Stone, right? The Rosetta Stone is actually this thing where, so for the longest time in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, right? So for those of y'all who don't know what those are, ancient Egyptians used to write in pictograms back in the day that looked kind of like this. Well, historians didn't know how to decipher it, and so for hundreds of years, what was written on the pyramid walls, Western historians had no clue what it said, right? Many Egyptians didn't even have any idea what it said, because the thing about it is you just couldn't decipher it. But this thing was actually discovered by Napoleon's armies, and it actually has one passage written in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, the other one written in Greek, in simplified Egyptian, and the other one written in Greek, right? So it's the same passage 3 different times, so you could actually reference back and finally transfer and transcribe and translate what was written in ancient Egyptian, right? Which is a really cool thing. It was one of the only positive things that really came out of it. Now, some of y'all are going to be like, well, Mr. Derry, the next thing's kind of positive, because whenever Napoleon decides to abandon his armies and then return to France, what's going to end up happening is when he gets back to France, he's expecting people to be dissatisfied with him, angry, probably upset, because this invasion was ultimately a failure. But what ends up happening is he returns to a hero's welcome. Which, what? That doesn't make any sense. Why is this guy returning to a hero's welcome back in France if he just lost? Well, a lot of it has to do with the speed at which information travels, right? And most of the people back in France had not heard of the Battle of the Nile or his ultimate failure there. So what Napoleon's going to decide to do is try to be the opportunist that he is and seize on this opportunity, right? He wants to seize on this opportunity to take over the French government and install himself as all but the straight-up leader of France, right? And he wants to use the military at his back to do something very important. The next thing I'm about to teach you is very, very important for the rest of your regular life, right? Not so much necessarily in this exact moment in history, but more along the lines of the word that I'm about to teach you is a really, really great vocabulary term that you should know for the rest of your life. Like when Kalia was trying to remember disseminate for her quiz and for her vocab stuff. This word is also a really, really big one. This right here is known as the coup d'etat of 1799, right? Now, the coup d'etat of 1799 is a very important event because this is when Napoleon installs himself as the leader of France, all right? But what you have to understand is that a lot of people come to power via what is known as a coup, right? A coup or a coup d'etat. You can say it either way. And what a coup or a coup d'etat is a sudden seizure in power or an overthrow of a government, usually using a military, right? And so think of it like a revolution in a day, right? So basically what happened is Napoleon entered into this big building known as the National Assembly building in Paris, which I think is where that happened. I'll have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure it's where it happened. Not that it's really important. It's not going to affect you. But he goes in there to overthrow the Directory and the Council of 500, right? And he enters into this place with the military at his back, as you can see the bayonets and stuff like that, and they are arresting members of the government, and they are going to overthrow them and install a new one. So when Napoleon comes into power, when he does this coup d'etat of 1799, his victorious seizure of the French government will result in him being somewhat completely in power, right? Because he actually is very crafty, right? And Napoleon decides to create a three-man executive branch rather than the directory that was five, and he calls it the consulate, right? And it's a three-man branch, but he establishes himself as what is known as first consul, right? And so if y'all are remembering stuff, I know Stanger right now is probably freaking out or whatever, because the consulate or consuls are what used to rule ancient Rome. So what is Napoleon trying to demonstrate? He's trying to be like, look, we could be even more Roman, we could be even more Republican, we could be even more of that ideal and the grandeur that they had. We could even have an empire one day. And he's trying to basically evoke the idea and show the French people that he's all about them ruling through their will, which is actually not true, right? He's just using symbolism to get this done, because in all but title, he became the leader of France on that day, right? And so his early reign is going to be marked by some successes, and he thought successes, but as a historian, I look at some of the things that he did as terrible, awful, god-awful things, right? But his early reign from 1799 to 1803, when he's establishing himself basically as the leader of France, using his consulate actually in his position as first consul to really kind of move and push and dictate the way the things in France go, he decides to stabilize the economy, which is a good thing. He has massive victories in northern Italy, which for him was a good thing. And also his legend is beginning to grow. Now, when I bring up his legend growing, you have to understand that the idea and the imagery and the visualizations of Napoleon being a general and a military leader that is bringing pride to France is beginning to grow, right? But his legend is growing, okay? So some of it may be fictitious and a little bit over-exaggerated, but it's still growing all the same. This right here is probably one of the most famous paintings that actually shows him crossing a very famous mountain range, right? We talked about this in ancient Rome. He's crossing, what is it, y'all? That's exactly right. The Alps, right? He's crossing the Alps on the back of his horse named Marengo. And who is another famous individual that crossed the Alps to go try and take over Rome? It's none other than Hannibal, right? Which is chiseled into the rocks right there, but it is faded. And there's Carlos Magnus, Charlemagne's imagery and signature chiseled into the rocks of the Alps, because he crossed the Alps to go save the Pope from the Lombards, right? Also there. But then look at the fresh new one, Napoleon Bonaparte. He's placing himself in history alongside of those other great generals, right? So we also have to understand, though, that that's probably not what it looked like when he actually crossed the Alps, all right? It probably actually looked like this because it was really cold and he probably would have been on a mule and he would have been sad. Now, going into it, though, you have to understand his legend is, though, growing, right? And the esteem that he's getting and the rapture that he's getting from growing his rule in France, and the people of France are looking at him as a leader, is really helping his entire movement, right? Now, in the process, though, while doing all this, he's going to be rigging elections, because he holds these things called plebiscites to be like, we are a republic and I am your consul. Would you like to vote for me to be consul for life? And he has an election to be consul for life, and over 90% of French people vote for him to actually do that. Turns out, after we've actually gone in historically and looked at the records, it looks like he probably rigged those elections and a lot of the votes were not real. Now look, but also he's going to write a new constitution. He's going to sell the Louisiana territory to the United States, which is a really big deal. He does that in 1803. He then also tries to bring back slavery in one of his colonies. Like, more on that later, but what the heck? What the heck, man? That's really screwed up. The, literal, reign of terror abolished slavery in this place called Saint-Domingue, which we'll talk about later. And he tries to bring it back, which is really screwed up, man. Don't do that. Yeah. And also, he does this thing called the Concordat of 1801, where he also, remember, during the Reign of Terror and the Committee of Public Safety canceled Christianity. He brings Catholicism back to France, right? He makes a deal with the Pope for him to actually come back and sanction the churches and bring Catholicism back to France. And he does that in a very aggressive moment, but it still is a good political move, right? And he also wrote this thing called the Napoleonic Code, which was a law system code that had a lot of huge positives to it and a lot of massive negatives, all right? Some of the biggest positives to it include the fact that it actually did equality before the law, so every person, regardless of their class, would be charged with crimes the exact same. He also is going to do things, for example, like opening these things called lycees, which are the very first French public school system, and he's going to write that in the Napoleonic Code as well, and also the new Constitution. He's also going to introduce, though, as well, this thing called a meritocracy, right? And a meritocracy is where you actually work your way to the top, and you're not getting government positions based on who you were born to or what family you are from, right? The huge negatives that he does, though, is he, like I said, tried to bring back slavery in this, and then also he took away, write this down, he took away the rights of women that they had gained in the revolution, right? After the March on Versailles, after Olympe de Gaulle actually writes the Declaration of the Rights of Women, after all these different things happened where women earned rights during the revolution, Napoleon took them away because he's an awful, terrible sack of crap. Happy Women's History Month. Now, look, going into it, though, also, Europe sees him as a threat, though, okay? So the whole lot of them start attacking him. Remember we started talking about this during, like, the revolution, and there were these things called the coalition armies, right, that were attacking France because they didn't like all the change that was coming in, and they were scared that it might happen to them. Well, they're going to reignite those wars, and in 1803, the Napoleonic Wars start, aka the Wars of the Coalitions, right, when England, the Netherlands, Prussia, and Austria, and Russia are going to try and band together to try and stop Napoleon and his expanse. But it does not go very, very well, right, because he does not lose, all right? Something that you have to understand, Napoleon ever only lost one war of the coalitions, and it was the last and final war. All right, French armies are going to begin to establish occupational forces all over Holy Roman Empire and Northern Italy because he just keeps winning all these really big battles. That means that if he's established occupation forces and he's now in other places and he is controlling them, and if the borders of France have expanded and they're controlling people that don't necessarily speak the same language that they are, that means that we're not just the French country or kingdom anymore. That means they're now the French First Empire, right? Because they're beginning to expand and control things much like ancient Rome did. And so just like the ancient Romans, what does Napoleon declare himself? He crowns himself Emperor of France in 1804. And I actually mean that literally, like crowned himself in this big ceremony where he invited the Pope and stuff like that. After the Concordat in 1801, he invited the Pope to his crowning ceremony, and he entered into the halls of Notre Dame with his wife Josephine behind him that he was like obsessed with. His wife Josephine was right behind him, of course, lovingly like watching as he walked down the like walkway. But he already had a hat on, like he already had like a laurel wreath on, like Caesar would wear and stuff like that. Already had one of those on his head. And so when the Pope goes to put the crown down on his head, saying basically like, God is blessing you with this, he stands up and rips the crown out of the Pope's hands and turns around and puts it down on his wife's head, trying to say that this crown that he has already bestowed upon himself is the real crown, and then that one is more ceremonial, right? And so as you see right here, also Napoleon, the emperor, sitting on top of his throne, is now beginning to exert a lot of power, and it is going to go to his head, right? And the same guy that actually painted both of these, right? The one that's this court painting, which is actually massive, y'all. It's huge. Like Napoleon is like your size in real life on this painting. And that one right there was actually painted by the exact same guy that painted this, all right? Jacques-Louis David, who actually became the court painter of like Napoleon. But what's going to happen after he does this, the Napoleonic Wars are going to aggressively escalate, and he won battle after battle after battle that he actually faced against coalition forces, right? One of the most famous ones being this thing called the Battle of Austerlitz, right? He actually used many different types of techniques to take over the coalition forces and expand his armies to the greatest size that they would actually become. Or not his armies, but his territory to the greatest size it would become. But he did not win this other big battle known as Trafalgar. All right, so now Trafalgar was actually a naval engagement against none other than Admiral Horatio Nelson again, where the French Navy was decimated by the British Navy. I'm talking waxed, y'all. He got his butt handed to him. But the thing about it is it demonstrates to us, yet again, that he can win a lot of battles on land, but he could not win battles on the water, right? And so the French Navy would be wrecked at that moment, but it's okay because in his mind, he's grown his empire to that size. Everything outlined in red is what Napoleon controlled in his French First Empire, which is absolutely ridiculous. And so at that moment, he's beginning a new constitution. He's doing this whole thing. He's crowning himself emperor. He looks like this. He's sticking his hand in his shirt. He's getting older, but he also looks like he's doing some good stuff, right? He looks like he's enthused. He looks like he's positive. But then he's going to go from that to this, right? Because he's going to start losing real quick after the Battle of Austerlitz and after the year 1812, right? Because his downfall will come very quickly after 3 massive mistakes that he makes, known as the Continental System, the Peninsular Campaign, and the invasion of Russia, all right? But we'll talk about all those things in our next class. I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.